When my uncle grabbed my late grandmother's $5 million cashier's check and ripped it into tiny pieces right in front of my face, the entire living room burst into cruel, hysterical laughter. My cousin pointed at me, sneering. "That's what you get for playing the golden favorite, Maya. You get 0. They thought they'd just destroyed my entire life, along with the only thing standing between me and massive debt. But what my greedy family didn't realize was that I wasn't crying out of despair. I was holding back a smile. 2 hours later, as they were opening bottles of champagne to celebrate stealing the entire estate, my phone buzzed. It was the vice president of First National Bank calling, and the message he delivered made the room go completely dead silent. "My name is Maya, and this is the story of how my family's arrogance cost them everything. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old, and up until 3 days ago, I thought my family was just flawed, not heartless. But standing in the grand foyer of my late grandmother's estate right after her funeral, the mask completely slipped. The air still smelled faintly of lilies and heavy rain, yet nobody in that room was mourning. My Uncle Richard, a man who hadn't visited Grandma in over 2 years, was already casually pacing the marble floors, pouring himself her 50-year-old scotch. Beside him stood my cousin Chloe, cross-referencing high-end auction sites on her phone while eyeing Grandma's antique jewelry collection. Grandma had spent her whole life keeping her true financial worth a total mystery, living quietly while building a hidden empire. But the second her heart stopped, her house filled with human vultures ready to pick her memory clean. They didn't care about her legacy or her love. They only cared about one thing: who was going to walk away with her multi-million-dollar fortune. An hour after the last funeral guests left, Uncle Richard slammed the heavy oak doors of Grandma's study shut. The air instantly turned suffocatingly tense. He sat behind her mahogany desk, leaning back with a look of supreme authority, while Chloe leaned against the bookshelf with her arms crossed. I sat quietly in the corner, keeping my composure while they prepared to divide up a life they'd ignored for years. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Richard sneered, his cold eyes landing directly on me. "Maya, you might have spent the last 6 months playing dedicated caretaker, but let's be entirely realistic. You're a step-granddaughter. You don't carry our blood, and you certainly don't carry any right to this estate. Bloodline is what matters, and the paper we'll draft in my briefcase makes it clear that the entire $5 million estate is going to Chloe and me." Chloe let out a condescending chuckle, smugly adding, "So pack your bags, sweetie. You get 0. I didn't flinch. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a crisp, heavy paper. I set it gently on the center of the desk. It was an official $5 million cashier's check from First National Bank, personally handed to me by Grandma just hours before she passed. Uncle Richard stared down at the check, his jaw tightening as he read the 8 figures printed across the top. For 3 seconds, absolute silence fell over the room. Then, his face twisted into a grotesque, red-faced sneer. "Nice try," he barked, a sharp laugh escaping his throat. "A $5 million cashier's check? You honestly thought you could fabricate a fake bribe and walk out of here with Dad's life savings?" Before I could say a word, Richard snatched the paper off the desk with both hands. With a violent, deliberate tear, he ripped it straight down the middle. Chloe gasped, then burst into a sharp, cruel laugh. Richard didn't stop. He tore the check into tiny, jagged confetti, tossing the scraps directly onto my lap. "That's what your fake check is worth, Maya," Chloe mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "Trash. Just like your place in this family." The room echoed with their harsh, triumphant laughter. They stared at me, waiting to see me break down into tears, begging for mercy. But I didn't shed a single tear. I calmly brushed the torn paper off my knees, looked Richard dead in the eye, and quietly said, "I'll be packed and out by tomorrow." They thought they'd just destroyed me, completely unaware of what was coming next. The moment I stepped out of the study, the celebration exploded behind me. I stood in the hallway and watched as Uncle Richard popped a bottle of vintage champagne, pouring generous glasses for himself and Chloe. They weren't even hiding their greed anymore. They sat at the dining room table with cheap ballpoint pens, scribbling down Grandma's property on paper napkins, assigning the Lake Tahoe cabin to Chloe and the main mansion to Richard. They laughed loudly about how easily they discarded me, raising their glasses in a toast to their newly acquired millions. I didn't say a word. I quietly walked down the driveway, got into my car, and closed the door, sealing out the noise of their arrogant victory party. Resting my hands on the steering wheel, I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was 1:58 p.m. Grandma had given me one final, specific instruction on her deathbed. No matter what they do, sit in your car and wait for the phone to ring at exactly 2 o'clock. I took a deep breath and watched the digital numbers tick forward. At exactly 2 p.m., my phone screen lit up with an incoming call from First National Bank. I swiped the screen and placed it on speaker. Ms. Maya? This is Arthur Vance, Vice President of Private Wealth at First National. A smooth, authoritative voice spoke through the speakers. I'm calling to confirm the status of the memorandum duplicate draft your grandmother issued to you. Mr. Vance, I replied calmly. My uncle just ripped that check into pieces right in front of me. A long, satisfied hum came from the other end of the line. Excellent. That means your grandmother's trap worked flawlessly. Ms. Maya, that paper check was merely a voided, non-negotiable duplicate printed on security draft paper. The real $5 million has been sitting safely inside an irrevocable living trust. Mr. Vance's voice turned dead serious. Your grandmother's trust agreement included a very specific integrity clause. It stated that if any heir attempted to destroy, falsify, or forcefully alter her estate documents or gift instruments, they would be immediately, permanently disinherited. Because your uncle physically destroyed that flagged duplicate, our automated system just triggered the clause. All estate accounts, properties, and funds have officially transferred 100% into your name, and your family's access has been completely frozen. I stepped out of my car and walked back toward the house, holding my phone with Mr. Vance still live on speakerphone. As I pushed open the front doors, Uncle Richard and Chloe were standing near the grand staircase, still clinking their champagne glasses together in triumph. Back so soon, Maya? Richard smirked, crossing his arms with smug condescension. Forget to beg for your gas money? Actually, Richard, she brought company. Mr. Vance's stern voice echoed loudly through my phone's speaker, cutting through the room like a razor blade. Richard's smile instantly froze, and Chloe's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. This is Arthur Vance, Vice President of First National Bank. The voice continued, smooth and ice-cold. I am officially notifying you that as of 2:01 p.m., the Whitaker estate has been fully transferred into an irrevocable trust under the sole control of Maya. Furthermore, due to your physical destruction of bank-flagged property, all family accounts are frozen. Legal representatives are currently en route to serve your formal eviction notices. The color drained from Richard's face so fast he looked like a ghost. Chloe dropped her glass, sending champagne shivering across the hardwood floor. Grandma's trap had snapped tight, and their glorious victory had turned into absolute ruin. Without saying another word, I turned around and walked out of the mansion for the very last time, leaving them standing in the ruined silence of their own making. Over the next few months, justice took its full course. Richard and Chloe were forced to sell their personal belongings just to cover their soaring legal fees, drowning in the massive debts they'd tried so hard to hide. Meanwhile, I used Grandma's $5 million trust to honor her true legacy, funding local youth shelters and securing a bright, independent future for myself. Grandma taught me that greed always exposes itself in the end, and true loyalty is worth more than any price tag. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. What would you have done if you were standing in my shoes? Comment the city you're watching from down below so I can see how far my story has reached, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.